It usually starts before we even notice. A sentence lands wrong, and something inside us tightens, like a muscle preparing to flinch. I feel it as heat in the chest, not anger. More like an itch, the kind you scratch without thinking. We tell ourselves we just want to be understood, but the body is already moving before the story catches up. Words rush forward. Clarifications, footnotes, tone adjustments. Anything to stop that small, sharp feeling of being seen wrong. Being misunderstood feels physical, like someone pressed on a bruise we forgot was there. I notice how fast the mind panics. If they think that, then who am I right now? We spend years building a careful picture of ourselves. Competent, kind, reasonable. It's fragile in ways we don't like to admit. A misunderstanding isn't just noise. It feels like a hand reaching for that tower. So we rush in, we over-explain, not to connect, but to stabilize something inside us that just shifted. The strange part is how automatic it is. The body reacts faster than reflection ever could. There's a moment there, very brief, where the urge peaks and the reason hasn't arrived yet. That knot isn't about clarity. It's about identity, about keeping a familiar shape intact. I'm starting to think the correction comes from fear, not care. Fear of letting the wrong version of us breathe. And once you see that, the urge to interrupt feels less noble, more human, more exposed. I've noticed how the urge waits in the jaw, teeth pressed lightly together, like the mouth already knows it's about to defend something. We don't correct calmly. There's pressure, a buzzing behind the eyes, as if silence itself is doing damage. The body hates being paused in the wrong frame. Being misunderstood feels like being stuck mid-blink. I think that's why we rush. Not because the truth will vanish, but because our grip on ourselves feels slippery. There's always a split second. Speak now and fix it, or wait and feel the weight settle deeper. Most of the time, we lunge. Even when we pretend it's thoughtful, we bring evidence, context, tone explanations, hoping if we stack enough words, the feeling will ease. But the relief never lasts, because the fear wasn't about facts. It was about being misseen. I've corrected people perfectly and still felt hollow afterward, like I'd won an argument with no oxygen. That's when it gets obvious. The chest doesn't care that the sentence was accurate. Accuracy doesn't soothe the crack, it just hides it for a moment. The crack says something quieter, that our sense of self bruises easily when it's externally defined. We rarely admit that being misunderstood feels like being slightly erased, and the rush to explain is really a rush to exist clearly again. The conversation doesn't end when it ends. It follows us home, replays itself while the room is dark and too quiet. I catch myself rehearsing sentences I didn't say. Better ones. Cleaner ones. The kind that would have fixed everything. We call it thinking, but it feels more like circling, wearing a path into the floor. In my head, there's a trial, an invisible jury. I'm explaining myself to people who aren't there anymore. Every misunderstanding becomes evidence. Look, that's not what I meant. See? Right there. We keep piling context onto the memory, hoping it will finally stand upright. But the body doesn't relax. It stays braced, like it's waiting to be accused again. I think that's when it clicks. We're not fixing the misunderstanding. We're fixing our reflection. If I'd said it softer, if I'd explained earlier, if I'd chosen different words, the self becomes adjustable, tweaked, smoothed, less solid than we pretend. There's something lonely about that, being endlessly editable. No wonder misunderstandings hurt. They threaten the version of us we're still trying to hold together. And the crack keeps widening the more we chase closure through explanation. At some point, correcting stops being about them hearing us and starts being about us believing ourselves. The urgency isn't loud at first. It's close, too close, like standing inches from someone's face, afraid to step back. I used to think this was about control, but control feels clean. This feels messy, desperate, almost tender in a way I don't like. We want the right label to stay put. Kind, rational. Misread labels slide around and won't settle. So we chase them. The words, the impressions, as if catching them will steady us. But notice when the panic spikes. It's not when someone dislikes us. It's when they define us wrong. Being misunderstood feels like being placed inside someone else's drawing of you. And the instinct is immediate. Get out. Redraw. Correct the proportions before they harden. I see how exhausting that is now. Living as if our shape needs constant supervision. The body knows first. Shoulders sag, breath shortens. Something in us wants to stop performing. There's grief in that moment. Grief for how hard we've been working just to feel intact. I don't think we over-explain because we love clarity. I think we over-explain because we don't trust our own presence. If they misunderstand me, does that mean I disappear a little? That question sits deeper than logic, deeper than language. And this is where the habit starts to loosen. Not with confidence, with space. The cost shows up quietly, not as a breakdown. More like a dull heaviness we start carrying without remembering when we picked it up. Every explanation adds a little more weight, not because words are heavy, but because they're loaded with proof. We keep offering context, hoping someone will finally say, "Okay, I see you now." Most of the time, nothing happens. No relief. Just the echo of having tried. I notice how explaining starts to change how we look at ourselves. Like we're waiting for permission to feel solid. We begin checking. Am I coming across right? Did that land wrong? The self turns into a draft. Living as a draft is exhausting. Nothing ever feels finished enough to rest in. At some point, the body pushes back. Fatigue creeps into the shoulders. The breath gets shallow again. We start resenting the effort, not the people. The performance. There's envy there. Watching people speak without rehearsing their own defense. Silence begins to feel tempting, not as wisdom, as relief. But even silence carries tension when it's chosen out of fear instead of trust. The real cost isn't misunderstanding. It's how often we abandon ourselves trying to prevent it. And that's the quiet turning point. When carrying less starts to matter more than being precise. The first time we don't correct it, the body panics. Hands twitch. The mouth almost moves on its own. Silence feels like exposure, like walking out without armor and realizing everyone can see the soft parts. There's a surge of thoughts. They'll get it wrong. This will stick. This will define me. But something else happens too. The ground doesn't disappear. We're still here. The breath deepens just a little. Not relief. More like not drowning. I expected the misunderstanding to grow teeth. Instead, it just moves on. The body learns faster than the mind. Nothing terrible happens when we don't chase it. There's room now for pauses, for unfinished sentences, for not being perfectly framed. Some people misunderstand us and keep walking. That's hard to accept. But it's also information about where our explanations were never going to land anyway. Not correcting becomes an act of trust, not in them, in our own continuity. We don't fragment just because someone holds the wrong story. The self holds even when it isn't defended. That pause changes the weight of everything. Something shifts when we stop chasing the clean ending. Life doesn't tighten, it loosens. I used to think being understood was the finish line. Like once they got me, I could finally rest. But rest never came from that. It came from not needing to patrol every version of myself. There's a quiet confidence in staying put while the story stays messy. Other people will misunderstand us. Badly. Sometimes unfairly. That was never optional. What's optional is the reflex to fix it every time. Like our existence depends on their accuracy. We don't need to be perfectly mirrored to be real. The body knows when it's safe to stop proving. There will always be multiple versions of us walking around in other people's heads. Letting them exist doesn't erase us. It frees us. The mistake wasn't wanting to be understood. It was believing misunderstanding was a threat. We're still here, even when the story isn't corrected. And that turns out to be enough.